Hello, hello, hello. Good morning and good afternoon if you're here in Europe, obviously. We're going to do a little bit of introductions. Obviously, it's a webinar, so some people will be arriving late. So we'll also attend to that. I'm going to let Patrick introduce himself, then Susan is going to introduce herself. I'm Duncan Chapple. I'm going to be kind of hosting and taking part in the conversation. I'll introduce myself last, and then we'll kind of dig into the questions. There'll be some people who pop up in the waiting room. Forgive me if I look like I'm distractedly clicking to let them in. That's exactly what I will be doing. Also, as a point of housekeeping, Q&A is open. Please use the Q&A rather than the chat. That is nicer and politer for us. And then we're recording this, so we will share the recording of this with people afterwards. So, of course, you can write everything down in longhand if you want to. If you've got your quills already ready, then that's fine, but don't worry, we're recording this. Patrick, we've got a lot to talk about today. Can you kind of gear us into the conversation by introducing yourself?
Absolutely, Duncan. Thank you. I'm Patrick Lethert. I'm located in Minnesota, and I've been in tech marketing and affiliated functions for about 20 years in SaaS, fintech, online content, and other corners of technology, and have spent most of that time doing and leading product marketing, marketing teams as a whole, analyst relations, and then also worked in corporate development and strategy for a Fortune 100 company as well.
Fantastic. Susan, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm Susan. I have been, like Patrick, around for 25 years or so in mostly SaaS companies, enterprise software. Also kind of came out of the product marketing team and did double duty as product marketing and analyst relations, but the last several years have been focused solely on analyst relations at places like Saba and then ServiceMax, and currently I'm at Wrike.
Fantastic. And as a Wrike customer, it's a special pleasure to have you here. Big fan of that, for getting all my to-dos done. I'm Duncan Chapple. Just to introduce myself, I was an analyst during the dot-com boom, but really since then I've been working in analyst relations, either consulting to analyst relations programs or working in-house on them. At the moment, I'm a contractor with Sage Circle, supporting Elisa, the Finnish telecommunications brand, which is doing a roll-up of industrial software companies. What brought me into the conversation here today is over the last few years, I've been doing a lot of research into the users of industry analysts and kind of looking at how satisfied or not satisfied they are. And obviously, all of us are speaking all the time with industry analysts, and we understand that this is a challenging market for them, and they're really interested in trying to sell more and deliver more value. And you know, that is how we're kind of getting into today's conversation. We've prepared some talking points, and we're going to try and flow around between ourselves. But we're also very open to your questions and comments. Certainly, from my perspective, anything that you want to ask is more interesting than I spontaneously am thinking already, because I know it already, and your questions might contribute something newly. So I want to start off just by framing a part of the analyst value proposition. As an analyst, I think we take quite seriously the work that we're trying to do for people, right? We're speaking with end users, we're speaking with vendors, and we're speaking with service providers, channel partners, resellers, all that kind of stuff. And I think these perspectives fit together very well, but there are some tensions between them as well. As an end user, it can be really challenging to use technology. Like very often, if you're writing research as an analyst, it's being used by people who've got quite kind of typical problems, quite normal problems. But then when you get into an inquiry call, very often you're speaking with people who've got very unusual problems. who've got specific pains that the research can't counter. And I think that means that if you've worked as an analyst for a little while, you have a lot of compassion for end users, both for people involved in selection and those who are actually using the tools, because there can be surprises, right? Like things can happen that even as vendors, even as providers, we might be surprised sometimes what our solutions do, how they behave, how clients try to use our solutions. Vendors have often got very different questions. They're looking at user needs, users as a group, not necessarily as individual users or individual users' problems. And they're trying to understand how they stack up, how they can differentiate themselves. They're very interested in comparative evaluations, and I think analyst firms are quite good at comparative evaluations. And then I think maybe the least well-served major group of stakeholders are service providers, systems integrators, resellers, distributors, these sorts of people. It can be very hard to assess who you should be partnering with because the culture, as well as the go-to-market strength of an organization, these matter a lot. And it's quite easy to look at a product evaluation, like imagine Wrike, right? You can download Wrike, you can open it, you can play around with it, you can see, right, yeah, it does what it does, it does what it doesn't do. But it's really hard to work out what Wrike people are like. It's really hard as a reseller to work out if you should be reselling Wrike, or if you're a if you're a consultant, should you be training on Wrike rather than comparative systems? And analysts have got a great situation that they're like hanging around and smelling these vendors. They've got a lot of, as it were, I mean, not literally, hopefully, but they've got some insight into what's into what's going in. And so analysts are delivering these very value different propositions to these different stakeholder groups, and there are other stakeholders, investors and regulators, but I'm not sure how much synergy there is sometimes between the analysts. So that's my kind of opening pitch on the problem, as it were. And there's more we can say about that. But I wonder if either of you have got thoughts about like where analysts are at, how these different stakeholder groups impact their business models, maybe.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in around kind of what we see the focus is from analyst firms today and who they're targeting. They work with companies worldwide of lots of different sizes, but we all know that they tend to focus on the largest vendors. And while they make the playing field very level, especially when you're talking about Gartner, Forrester, IDC, everybody gets a briefing, those things are free, you don't have to pay for them. But we know that more time is spent with the largest vendors, with the largest buyers as well. Mm-hmm. If you can pay for a very expensive Gartner subscription or very expensive subscription for many of the big firms, you get more time with the analysts and you get a deeper understanding of what they're hearing. And larger vendors in the space pay for that extra time, right? They buy strategy days, they buy fancier subscriptions that give them access to things like Gartner for General Managers that has more bells and whistles. So they are definitely seeing a enterprise lens on the market. And sometimes the mid-market users and buyers and vendors are not heard as much from the largest analyst firms, even though they do make an attempt to reach out to those folks and get that take on the market as well. They definitely aren't entirely ignored, but more time is spent with those largest vendors, both on the vendor side and on the end user side. And when you think about an end user buyer, we talked about how those things are changing over time, and the buyer journey has shifted to doing more research up front and before you even talk to a vendor. And so in that landscape, mid-market buyers without fancy subscriptions to all the firms are oftentimes getting their information from vendors. So they're seeing another lens on the market as well. So they're hearing the analyst feedback and they're getting access to those reports, but maybe they're only getting the Magic Quadrant and not the critical capabilities, for example, to use a Gartner example. With the Wave, you kind of get both in one package, which can be valuable. But oftentimes that information is then filtered through yet another lens, which is through the vendor lens, which may not be giving them all the details that they would have by being able to interact with the analyst directly.
Yeah.
So that kind of creates a little gap in the market. So Patrick, maybe we can hear your perspective on that gap and what to do when those analyst insights maybe aren't available to you.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, obviously the market need for quality content around software doesn't end where the reach of the analyst ends. And if you look at what other content is out there that some of these especially small and mid-market customers may be accessing, there's a lot of it out there, but most of it suffers, or at least potentially suffers, some issues around credibility and objectivity. When I think about what places that I've seen customers go to gather information, obviously there's a proliferation of software review websites, which can have some good information, but oftentimes a significant number of those are going to be cherry-picked customers who were hand-selected by the vendors, who may have been brought in under an incentive program, and worse. I'm well aware of situations where employees are out posing as customers as well. So there's definitely some risks there. You have some analysts and influencers who are in pay-to-play relationships with vendors who are writing content that may seem very objective on the surface, but is really being created and positioned in a way that is, like a words for hire sort of relationship. So that's not going to necessarily be objective information. The vendors themselves are creating more and more content for websites and SEO purposes. That is a lot of times valuable and contains some good insights, but again, not being created for the purposes of objective evaluation on the part of the end user. There are customers that go to trade shows, and your big sponsors are going to dominate the message that comes out of those and be the place that drowns out what may be the messaging of the companies that spend less money there. And obviously, the big story going forward, I think, is AI. You have more and more people turning to AI to gather information, and AI systems are as good as the information that they're accessing. So as less credible and less objective information proliferates, and the great information that is created by some of the analysts is behind paywalls, all of your AI models are going to become more and more dependent on the information that is publicly available. And, I think back to the number of times in my career where we've seen customers that are working from a pile of information that they gathered, and you want to critique where they gathered their information. I think that's going to become more and more of an issue as people turn to AI. So, and Duncan, this probably brings up the question: how does analyst content find its way out and become more visible and therefore more valuable?
Yeah. And I think this point of analyst content becoming more visible, I think we've had like waves of this conversation. One was about like SEO and how the traditional kind of paywall model of analyst firms punishes, in a way, the analyst firms that use paywalls, which arguably are the most independent or the most rigorous, maybe. And then consequently, what that means is that the firms that have got like freemium vendor-sponsored models, their content is more likely to be out there. Yeah. In one of our prep calls, I was talking briefly about oh my God, what is it called? Gresham's law. Gresham's law, yeah, that when there is when there are fake coins in circulation, people hold on to the real ones. They don't spend them. So then all you have are the fake coins out in circulation. And obviously a lot of the analyst content that is out there is really good, but then some of it is really not that good. When Patrick, when you were talking about reviews, like people love reviews, don't they? But then on the other hand, you look at the way that almost every vendor is a 4.2 on Gartner Peer Insights. You know that something is happening that means that maybe it's hard to find a signal amongst the noise, and also there's a problem about what analysts are good at writing and what people are looking for. So, you know, analysts are very good at comparative evaluations. They're very good at responding to the news because that's what vendors talk to them about.
Mhm.
But then buyers have often got, especially in the mid-market, they've got like daily challenges. You know, they're looking for new solutions, but to problems that are often 10 years old or 20 years old or 100 years old. I don't know. Analysts are not very good at writing about what does technology do to help you to deal with this very old traditional problem. Analysts are a bit bored at doing that, and then what that means is that
All research is on AI now.
exactly. I mean, I don't want to like, you know, name and shame Forrester for like massive pivot towards Gen AI, because Gen AI can answer a lot of questions in many areas.
And
But
it's an important problem to go look at. Like,
yeah,
I'm reading all the Gen AI content, certainly.
but then if you think like Gen AI is a way that you solve a business problem, it's not a business problem. Yeah. And so I think that's the challenge, that buyers look for answers to problems. And if if analysts are writing about technologies rather than problems, then they don't have that. And then, Susan, when you were talking about the way that you know, vendors put the most effort into using analyst time, and obviously they spend the most, you know, that they've got large valued contracts. I wrote a blog post last year turning some data on this, and this kind of rich get richer phenomenon where the big vendors own more and more and more of the talk time is astonishing. And even within the big vendors, the giant vendors own more and more and more. Like, if you're only a $5 billion company, you're hardly in the conversation anymore, because the $50 billion companies are owning the conversations. So that is really hard, and it means that actually vendors need to have different conversations with analysts. They need to do their analyst relations differently, to encourage analysts to write their research differently, so that then that analyst research gets consumed by the buyers. That's the only way to overcome this conundrum of visibility. And I mean, Patrick, I wonder if this is maybe a good time to bring in you. And I know you've got a nice analogy with like Kevin Lucas and his analyst relations framework. I think you've got some ideas there that help us to understand this problem more clearly, and maybe how to start to fix it.
Yeah. So I'll make up for the Forrester piece by praising Kevin Lucas, because I do believe that his AR model that focuses on the revenue side of the business is really, for anyone that's not already embracing that, to me, it's a really important angle. And I feel that way. You know, we've all been through ups and downs in the world of tech. And one of the things that happens in the world of tech, of course, is when times are not as good, headcount and program spend that is further away from the financial objectives of the organization is always that which is at risk. And you know, we've probably all been hit by some of that. And as a result, from my perspective, you look at wanting to be as close to the financial metrics of your organization as possible, and deliver results that are going to help improve lead generation and the ability to bring new customers into the funnel, getting from new customer to closed one faster, right? Accelerating that sales cycle, and also having information and insights on the market that are going to help your CSMs and others retain more business and upsell your existing book. So, I do think that keeping an eye on those financial metrics is really important. And when we as AR people, a lot of times you report on what your metrics are, and it may be, favorable mentions or number of briefings or whatever the case may be. Those are all valuable and they're all good. But the closer you get to the financial objectives of the organization, I think the more value that's perceived in the AR function from the executive level of the organization. And that is what sort of circles me back out to then, what can the analyst firms themselves do to help the AR people and the product marketing folks that are managing AR be able to demonstrate that value at the executive level in the organization. And to me, and Susan will have more detail around this, is that really getting out of the very tip top of big spending vendors and global enterprise customers is probably going to be the best path, both for the analyst firms and making their services more valuable to the AR professionals that they serve. Obviously, you're going to have a much broader reach and impact a lot more customer decision making if you are speaking to that broader market. You're going to get a more diverse set of perspectives when you're speaking to more customers that are different than one another. And also, a lot of the cutting edge technology, especially OT, that is being implemented is not going to be necessarily implemented by the global organizations who have long and intricate processes that they need to go through to implement new technology. It's going to be the smaller and the more nimble organizations that bring that cutting edge technology in and validate those use cases early on in the game. And I think that can make analyst content more valuable, make it more valuable to a broader group of people, and turn that into a scenario where there's more interaction with more clients, which makes the AR function closer and closer to where the buying decisions are being made. So with that, I think, Susan, would love to turn it over to you for some thoughts on the mid-market and how that can be attractive to analysts.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is a market that analysts do address today. They have lots and lots of mid-market vendors as well as mid-market buyers, but they probably see them a little less often than the companies with deep pockets that are paying for extra time. But that pulse on what's happening in the mid-market, I think, is incredibly valuable to analysts. And there are more of them. So it's a huge market for the analysts to be able to tap in deeper ways. And we know our analyst firms are, Gartner has dominated the market, and everybody else is kind of trying to find their spot and niche where they can grow more. And mid-market, I think, still is a bit underserved. So that is a really big market for them to tap into with a lot of innovative ideas. I think the needs evolve faster in the mid-market. Sometimes mid-market companies are a little more willing to try the cutting edge stuff, to do some experiments and see what works and see what doesn't. in a little more real way and be willing to talk about it. We all know as marketers that it's hard to get people on the record on their case study as to what they did, especially if they're a huge Fortune 500 company or Fortune 10 company, going through the hoops of trying to get them to talk about what they've done is sometimes a big challenge. Mid-market companies are a little more willing to be a case study in your survey and share what they're doing, get their name out there more. I'll share a story from very, very early in my career. I actually started my career as an analyst at Frost & Sullivan right out of college, contributing to research. And while I was there, and this was a very long time ago, Frost & Sullivan was known for surveys and market size and, measuring the CAGR, the compound annual growth rate, right? And they were selling to companies with research budgets, right? And you need these numbers to be able to forecast and plan. And they realized the research budgets were pretty small in the organization, but the big budget in the organization was marketing budgets. And so they shifted the business model and added the Forrester Awards to reach the marketing budget that they were not reaching. They were just hitting that research budget, but they realized there was a whole opportunity. And Gartner realized that early on, right? The Gartner Magic Quadrant is largely driven by vendor marketing budgets, right? We all go and license it and want reprints on our website to be able to share that. So it's a very lucrative market to get out to all those mid-market marketing budgets as well. Mm-hmm. So Duncan, we've talked a lot about the problems, but what do you think analyst firms should do differently in the future to address these challenges and kind of better serve the mid-market as well as all of the market?
Totally. Well, I mean, I think I think actually that there are things that the two of you have just said that help us kind of segue nicely into the second half of the hour, looking at solutions. And actually, I see a question that's just come in from Leonard, which I think also has some, which also says something, because Patrick makes this point that mid-sized and smaller analyst firms struggle to get tension with the big analyst firms because they often don't have that customer base. So you think of the way that Gartner sells to, I think it's 71% of the Fortune 1000. And if you're a vendor who is selling something super expensive that only the Fortune 1000 buys, then Gartner's your destination, isn't it? It's like if you only sell hot dogs to people who travel on the Amtrak, you really have to be in an Amtrak station. Otherwise, there's no way to sell those hot dogs to the travelers. But then if you're selling into the mid-market, there is this opportunity. And certainly what I've seen, and to pick an example of like PAC, the European analyst firm that used to be part of the technology roll-up, they opened up a research program where I think they had something like 20,000, 30,000 IT users, mostly in European tech, who would get access to PAC research in exchange for taking part in their research panels. And that meant that suddenly they had this massive readership that meant that then vendors became much more attentive to them, and they were able to develop new offers that made them more relevant to the mid-market. And Susan, as you were saying, that there simply are so many more mid-market customers. And we'd like to think, oh well, Gartner dominates, but Gartner dominates the high-end enterprise, right? It dominates in the Global 500. It dominates in the Fortune 1000, and you can't go head to head with that, right? I think this has been part of Forrester's problem, is that its turn to role-based research was wise, but it was still selling role-based research into organizations that were probably already Gartner clients, and they had to move somewhere else. So I think what we're seeing is that the analyst revenue model, because it's based on that two-sided engagement, they're working with the vendors, but their legitimacy with the vendors is because of the buyer audience, because of the value they can deliver to buyers. The analyst firms have to exploit this value to the mid-market, and then that also means shifting not only the business model, they've got to have more freemium research, things that are more affordable, lower touch. But then it also means they've got to start writing differently, and they've got to produce different content, and content that is more aligned to what mid-market people want. And Susan, I know you've had a lot of thoughts about the content model, and I think actually if we can just hear with you on the content model, I think after that might be a very nice turn, just to a very nice point to come to Leonard's question, because Leonard's question is, well, nobody's writing content about the kind of problem that my organization is solving. And okay, the kind of like the maybe the drum roll symbol clash is the analysts need to be writing research about a wider range of problems. But
Yeah.
can you get into this content model? Why are so many analyst firms stuck in the same content model as each other in a way?
Yeah, for sure. And it's a luxury to have your business be in a market that's covered by one of the big analyst firms, that it's not a just a landscape or a market guide, but it's actually a Magic Quadrant or Wave or a MarketScape. I mean, it's a big luxury to have analysts that are focused on your space. And there are so many different segments of technology that are underserved today. I know Gartner is making a really big push to expand that. There are a lot of new Magic Quadrants in the last year. But I think there are kind of fewer of the niche firms covering the market from various angles, because it's been a tough market for those smaller vendors to gain mind share, even if they are covering a segment of the market that's underserved today. So yes, it's challenging to create a category and get an analyst to write about you and get their mind share. So I know some of the things we talked through when we were prepping was some ideas to help personalize that research, maybe reach a broader audience. And we talked about ways to make things low cost or free and get out to more of those people, and maybe do some additional research that hasn't been done by others in the market. So we talked some about ungating content as an analyst firm. They live and die by, you have to have a subscription to get the content, or a vendor has to buy it for you and serve it up to you because it serves their needs as well. But I love when the vendors do offer some free research and say, hey, this is so important, I want to send this out to the market. And taking that out from behind the form reaches more people. It's the same dilemma we have as marketers. We put analyst research on the website and we almost always gate it because we've spent money on it and we don't want to have that not be recognized. We want to measure it, but you get to more people when it's ungated. They're more willing to read and consume the research and maybe have their minds changed about a market if we don't gate it. So it's the same dilemma for an internal marketing team as it is for these large analyst firms to put out some of their most interesting research to a broader audience at maybe no cost. Also, maybe changing some of the engagement models. So we talked a little bit about having an analyst call or a strategy day where it's got a big price tag, but maybe there's a version for mid-market companies where you fill out a form and send them some detail, and you put in your request for this type of feedback, and they send you some things to read. They send you some brief answers, and then maybe there's a 30-minute phone call at the end of it, and it has a much smaller price tag, more of kind of the inquiry experience that you get when you do have a full subscription and have inquiry time with the analyst, where the analyst firm's always following up with, hey, here's 3 more things to read and 1 more analyst to talk to. If that kind of interaction could be packaged for a mid-market buyer as well, who maybe doesn't have access to a subscription, as kind of more one-off engagements, could be an interesting as well. And then we talked about interactive tools as well. there are various evaluation reports that allow you to personalize them more if you have a subscription and can go in and move all the levers yourself and change, this particular use case, I want to make a 4, but this other use case is really super important to us. I'm going to move the lever up all the way there. Subscribers have access to those type of things, but maybe those don't get down to the mid-market buyer as well. The mid-market buyer often doesn't ever see the critical capabilities or the detailed scoring at all if it's not offered by a vendor. So getting mid-market buyers access to some of those tools might be interesting ways to do it as well. Last point, and then we'll kind of move to Patrick and the value of expanding the reach. But build versus buy information, surveys in general, like we all like to see data. We all want to hear what's going on in the market. There's so much incredible inquiry analysis that the analysts could provide that's often locked in the most expensive subscriptions to get access to that, or in strategy time. And then you get some insight in terms of what's been happening in the market and trends and how many people are adopting, and some of that really interesting data is locked in some of those more expensive packages, and democratizing that, making it available to more people might be a really great way to reach that new audience as well. So Patrick, go ahead.
Just Patrick, before you come in, I wonder if I can just kind of bring up 2 questions from the chat. So one is this scenario of a systems integrator that is maybe not the software vendor that would be engaged, but I think we all know that very often when we're implementing enterprise software, the spend on services is more than the spend on the software itself. And yet analyst firms often overlook that. And I wonder, I'd be curious in your thought about what does it say that many analyst firms are not writing about major areas of spend like that. The other thing that I know you've got thoughts about already is pricing, right? So people may have seen, Greg is asking about GigaOm's new pricing model, where you can get pretty much full fat GigaOm access, whatever that's worth, but for like 50 cents a day, something like that. And that obviously dramatically changes the access that people have. Obviously, solving pricing doesn't solve usage if the right content isn't available, right? And we've all seen super expensive Gartner seats that aren't used because the services are not fit for the user's purpose. But Patrick, can I invite you to come in? Like, how can analyst firms be understanding like the personal value to the consumer of the research more clearly?
Thank you. Before I jump into that, I want to just throw 2 pitches out there as a little add-on to what Susan just talked about. And that is, number one, I think the idea of that lower touch inquiry type service for mid-market and small buyers makes a lot of sense. I think there's a ton of value there. I would make the pitch to the analyst firms to avoid, we all have the immediate, like we jump to, let's make this as low touch and as automated as possible. And the more it starts to look like press 1 for English, press 2 for enterprise asset management, whatever, the more it looks like that, the less it feels tailored, the less value there's going to be perceived in the eyes of the end user. I would also suggest, I think that the point she made, about how content can be split out, the idea of building out content sets with the specific purpose of part of it is going to be public facing and SEO, and part of it's going to be behind the curtain. And I do think that purposeful thought about how to bifurcate one content set in that regard could potentially pay some really big dividends. Doing 2 things at once, which dovetails right into the next portion of what I was going to talk about, and that is, on one hand, you want the best outcomes possible, but you want customers as well. It's one thing to do good for humanity. It's another to put food on the table. So, taking on and better serving more of the mid and small market, number one, obviously has the added benefit of bringing on new customers for the analyst firms that they're probably not getting today on the end user side. Not nobody is, but there's a huge untapped market there. And that would allow the analyst firms to significantly increase their addressable market and their opportunities to bring and retain new customers. The more of the market that the analysts have listening to them, the greater their reach, the greater their influence, obviously the more valuable that their position in the market is going to be in terms of getting more vendors engaged. I can say that in the course of my career, on at least one occasion, we were in a budgetary situation and forced to cancel some marketing programs, and one very major analyst firm was a casualty of that, specifically because in some of the customer groups I was with Accruent at the time, so we had enterprise asset management, workplace management, IoT, a whole pile of different solutions, and we canceled one contract specifically because they only speak to the biggest of the big, and Maintenance Connection, which was our EAM solution at the time, was a market leader in the mid-market, but we weren't as competitive with the hexagons of the world at the very top end, and that drove us ending up dropping an analyst subscription where it didn't make sense. So, more end user customers obviously is going to be greater influence over and of more interest to the buyer. And ultimately, the more customers that the analyst firms can serve also means better outcomes across the board. And if you think about that, to me, again, thinking about IoT, there was a point in time where the bulk of IoT installations that were being done were failing. I mean, we had stats from, forget the name of the gentleman from Gartner that we did a strategy day with, who, basically he said at that point in time, 2/3 of IoT implementations were not getting done within the parameters of what the customers were hoping to accomplish with them. Now, some of that may have been that it was just massive organizations with, swirling clouds of consultants there all the time, and just nothing could get done quickly. But at the end of the day, more ability to interact with clients on a broader scale, I think, is going to do a better job of not only educating those clients, but putting the analysts in a position to better educate the market as a whole. So, and I think what's really interesting in all this, in terms of working downstream, is that the content and the research is being done. We're not talking about creating new processes. We're really talking in many cases about just packaging information and solutions differently in a way that's going to be more approachable and more affordable to the broader market. So, Duncan, I believe this is where we hand it over to you to summarize some of the recommendations that we've talked through.
Oh, Duncan,
if I stop mute
mute
myself, then I'll be able to make an even bigger impact if I mute myself. So I think it's at the risk of being a little bit algebraic, it's almost like a multiplication effect, and I worry that makes it all seem simpler than it really is. The first thing, obviously, is more clients equals more revenue in direct senses and also in indirect senses. Like directly, you think of what GigaOM is doing, and they've done it before, and others. I'm thinking Burton, back in the day before they got bought by Gartner. They did something similar, of from time to time testing out penetration pricing, which can be at a whole series of levels. And if you're able to try to get a class of customer to try your research, you can generate more revenue from it, but you also learn about their customers and how their needs are different. So many firms have got customer trials going on, right? But what I'm thinking about is something different. If you've got a trial, somebody is working out whether your existing product works for them or not. But if you're able to identify a particular segment, reach out, try to get more customers in that market, in that size, in that vertical, or wherever, that gives you the chance to learn, right? You can generate revenue, but you can learn about your product market fit. Yeah. And I think analyst firms, there's sociologists who've got a word for it, where basically they all converge on the same business model as one another, rather than experimenting. I think one of the things that's crucial for the survival of analyst firms is to reduce the cost of experimenting. How can they get more clients and generate more revenue? It's so important to do that because of the second element, which is promoting industry penetration to vendors. I'm working with a vendor. We really value what we are spending with analysts. We value the insight from analysts, but every analyst firm is asking for more money. And to be honest, analysts are all pretty smart. They're all super useful. So how, as a vendor, do you decide which analysts to spend money with if they're all pretty good, they're all fairly insightful? Well, anything that an analyst firm can do to promote its industry penetration to vendors will help it to get more clients. Firstly, it'll get more vendor clients. Secondly, vendors will license its research more, will distribute its research more. So then the customers of that analyst firm will get more. But of course, also by increasing your industry penetration, you get more influence and you get more feedback. Yeah, so you're getting more feedback, so the quality of your research is improving. Your research is being used more, so you're realizing what's working, what is not working. All of that produces more insight, and then more insight multiplied by more readers equals more influence, and then that produces more vendor need, and then this just spirals upwards and upwards and upwards. And this synergy also works at the micro level. I just want to turn to another lovely comment from Leonard. He talks about the situation where sometimes an analyst might form a relationship with a user or even with a vendor at a smaller firm, and then that user or that vendor moves to a larger firm or moves into a more senior role, and then that relationship grows up, and then it leads to serendipity. And this is something that I remember as an analyst working at Ovum. We built up some relationships with, I think it was like the Ontario Department of Transport or something like that, right? And then that thing, it gave us a point of purchase, which then opened up to a very wide range of relationships across the province, then again across Canada. In a way, it gave us learning that allowed us to even understand how to better expand in the North American market. So even small incremental gains, as long as you're making money on them, they can really pay out for the long term. And then that brings me back to this thing about better outcomes for all. Yeah? If the analyst firms are able to get over the paywall, and even like as a paying Gartner customer, I was doing some work recently where I was researching a topic, and most of the Gartner research on that topic wasn't available to me, despite being a paying customer with a seat. Yeah, so like the fragmentation of the user experience that is created by this paywall addiction is so hard. So analyst firms have to find other ways of monetizing this. That produces better outcomes for everybody. It cuts the foundation away from pay to play. And I think certainly my perception is we're having a lot more conversations about pay to play now than we were 5 years ago, than we were 10 years ago, than we were 15 years ago. Yeah. We'll be able to get more objective insight into the hands of analysts. And then really critically, if we're getting more high quality content from analyst firms out where it can be indexed by AI and used to train AI, then that is going to improve decision making across all of humanity, basically. Okay, maybe that's a little bit too grand, but that's what I wanted to say, right? Anything that we can do to move analyst firms an inch forward, a centimeter forward, gives them momentum that allows this virtual circle to develop. I'm gonna kind of throw it back, I think, to Patrick and Susan. I mean, where do you think we need to go from here? Where do analyst firms need to go from here?
The one comment I would make right here, Duncan, just based on a couple of things that have been said, and that is I think the idea of content, excuse me, that is interactive, even if it's interactive on a lesser level in the transactional or non-subscription world, is a huge opportunity. All of us that have worked in software have spent, how many countless hours working on ROI calculators. And that to me is something that the analyst firms are so much better suited than me asking my sales team about all these various things. And ultimately, if that content is out there, again, and you don't have to give away everything up front, but if I as a
it's
vendor,
often the most expensive
yeah,
TEIs or even Nucleus, yeah. Like those can be some of the priciest engagements to get the value pieces.
I mean, the idea that the vendors would be sending their prospective customers to the analyst tools to work on them would seem like an absolute best case scenario for everybody.
Yeah. And I think ROI calculators are another strong example because the opportunity to improve those is vast. I mean, you mentioned those TEI studies from Forrester, and I use them, and I admire what they're doing. But many of those are based on 2 customers, 4 customers, right? Cherry-picked customers by definition. And I really think as an industry, I think we vendors and analysts can work together to make that better, right? To give more useful guidance than saying, well, the best possible performance of this is that, right? It's not. I don't think that's useful as a vendor. What is the best imaginable performance, right? It's what is a completely normal performance, right? What is the 1 standard deviation out, 2 standard deviations out? What is it likely to be like for that? Not what is it like for the best person you could ever find?
Yeah, and it's often there to fill in some data by someone who's proving to the people with the purse strings, should I buy this? Well, what is the ROI? Well, I have to have some numbers to put in.
Yeah.
So here is some data, and it's backed by a third party, and I can plug it in and move the sales cycle a little faster. It's a velocity piece, but it is not representative to every use case. There are so many different nuances that determine the ROI that you'll have in your organization versus the ROI that was measured for, again, the 4 or 5 customers who talked to the analysts as they were putting together a TEI or another kind of evaluative ROI model.
Absolutely. We're getting close to the top of the hour. I wonder if either of you have any other summative final thoughts or questions you want to pose to each other. If not, I can draw the call together.
I'm not sure if I have any final thoughts or questions. It's been a great conversation, and I'm so excited to see the Q&A that has come in. So certainly if the audience has more Q&A, that would be lovely. But I've definitely enjoyed the conversation, and I'm very happy that you asked me to be part of it.
Excellent.
Yep, same. Thank you, Duncan, and thank you, Susan. It was not only great doing the presentation today, but thought-provoking conversations leading up to it as well.
Fantastic. Well, I think we have no more questions in the Q&A. So unless somebody types something by the time I've finished thanking you and reminding you that I'm going to send out the note with the recording. If you are a Teams user, you may even find within, I don't know, like half an hour or something of this call ending, that the recording magically appears in your Teams sidebar where it is. Thank you so much for coming, and especially since most of the people who came are still here. I appreciate your engagement. Something has popped up in the chat. Could it be a thank you, or will it be a real question? It's a thank you. Yeah, okay. So thank you so much, Patrick, Susan. Great conversation. Really enjoyed this and super enjoyed the prep process with you as well. This was really intriguing and really enlightening as well. Okay, thank you so much. We'll speak to you soon.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.